Anyone who's been a fan of this channel for a while would know that my favorite game is Final Fantasy VII, or it's actually a tie between 7, 8, and 9, but since 7 was my first Final Fantasy, it holds a bit more of a special place in my heart. I've played this game a lot. My first completed file of the game alone reached the maximum time of 99 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds, dozens and dozens of hours before I actually stopped playing. While I'm sure I don't know every single little thing about the game, I know it particularly well. I also, therefore, know just how easy it is, and, well, truly wonderful in raw design, how broken the balance of the mechanics are. Final Fantasy VII is a game that you can legitimately beat without even trying, using just attack and curative spells. I've always wanted something a bit harder, though. Not something that's a brutal mess of luck and strategic requirements that shove the player in a corner, just something that's balanced around mechanics like the materia system and such. Well, when I finally picked up the PS4 remaster in 2017, I decided to try something interesting, just to see how fun it was. You see, this remaster comes with the option to turn off random encounters anytime you want. I knew this would have cascading effects on the other game systems if used too much, which might stymie growth in some pretty severe ways, but I also knew it was totally possible, and wondered if it might bring out some of what makes Final Fantasy VII system so great. So I decided to try playing through the game while not fighting a single random encounter, just to see what it was like. Spoiler, yes, it's possible. I know that arguably kinda makes the title of this video clickbait, but you're getting the same video either way, and I have to appease the algorithm gods somehow, you know? I have since finished the game 4 times with this challenge in place, and believe that it's the most balanced way to play Final Fantasy VII without mods, and I therefore feel like it's an option that many other people could enjoy experiencing if they gave it a shot, so I figured I'd share it in a video. Today, we're going to answer the question, how do you beat Final Fantasy VII without random encounters? A few clarifications need to be made before we start, though thankfully not near as many as with my Kingdom Hearts Challenge videos. And it's worth noting that, as per usual, the idea here is to share a challenge that can be fun for lots of people to try, one that's enjoyable, not mind-numbingly difficult. I'm not really interested in challenges that are here purely to make me suffer. Others are much better at that. So, if you try this challenge yourself, you can alter these rules in any way you wish. Firstly, no random encounters can be fought, even if you run from them. Second, this does not include any optional encounters, only random encounters are exempt. However, there are 2 caveats to these 2 rules. Because of the way Yuffie works, which we'll discuss later, you can consider her to not be a random encounter, as long as you get a fight with her right away. It's not completely random, there is scripting that can basically guarantee you'll fight her after a certain point. If you try to fight her and you don't get her battle, you have to reload your last save. The other caveat heads in the opposite direction. Any place where non-random encounters are infinite, like the soldiers guarding the door on the second reactor mission, or at the wavy wind barriers on your first visit to the North Crater, you can only fight these encounters once, though in this case I personally chose to skip them entirely. And that's basically it, honestly. Ensuring that you stick to this challenge is much easier to do than the ones I did for Kingdom Hearts, because you just set it to turn off random encounters and forget it. Muscle memory plays no part, and there aren't really any huge question marks that create massive gray areas. One more note is that we're going to skip the story during this challenge, since it really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. If you want to know more of my thoughts on the story, the gameplay, or Final Fantasy VII Remake's first part, I have extensive long-form critiques for both. So, with that done, let's jump right in. Almost immediately, as soon as the intro cutscene ends, we're able to grab 2 free potions, and are then thrust into a battle designed to be automatic in terms of difficulty. It's a basic gameplay tutorial, so just mash attack to win. I set myself into active mode to add a bit more spice, and then made battle speed as fast as possible. Usually we'd be fighting lots of security bots and soldiers here, but without random encounters we don't actually see anyone until the first boss, Guard Scorpion. Once again, this battle is kind of just a tutorial, and so it plays pretty standard. Don't attack when the Scorpion's tail is up, and spam Bolt 1 with Cloud while attacking with Barret. Use limit breaks for extra damage if they come up. Do that, and it'll be over in no time. Escape is easy without random encounters, after which we're separated from Barret for a bit. Pick up some items nearby, and then you'll eventually find yourself in a situation where Shinra soldiers try to surround you. Take the opportunity to fight all of these optional battles for just a bit of extra experience, gil, and AP. Contrary to popular belief, the experience we're gaining here won't actually matter that much. Unless you're meandering a bunch, fighting random battles throughout Final Fantasy VII only offers you an extra 10 levels or so by the end. That's a difference of level 55 compared to 45, and 45 is more than enough to take on any threat, even with mediocre equipment and materia setups. The thing that is much more of a challenge here is the lack of gil and AP. If you have the basic elemental materia and things like Restore on the entire time, you gain just enough AP to get to their third spells. So no Cure 3, only 1, 2, and regen. And there's no recourse if you unequip one for a few battles and try to come back later. The AP we gather is finite. Meanwhile, that means a lot of late game materia can struggle to be useful. It's not as bad as you might think, but grabbing something like Full Cure, Contain, or Ultima, and being able to use them will require putting them on as soon as you get them and leaving them on. And don't expect to be able to use summons like Bahamut Zero multiple times in a battle. Gil is much the same in practical terms. There are ways to gain extra gil infinitely without battling, but play your cards right and you'll start gaining enough savings to begin really investing in yourself without grinding things like Chocobo race betting. However, be warned that there are a few places where you have to make sure you don't overspend, or you'll not have enough money for a required expense. At that point, you either reload an earlier save, cheat, or your run is over. Contrary to what you might think, while most of Midgar is cake, it's not the end of the game that's the most difficult here. The middle of this challenge is what will push you the hardest, as you'll see. So anyway, once you get back to Sector 7's slums, take the opportunity to grab whatever equipment and such you want. Just be gentle on your wallet. Keep going until you have to jump off of the train. Once there, you can optionally head backwards to fight a set of Shinra soldiers if you want. Otherwise, go forward. The only thing in your way here is a fiddly button timing puzzle, and then the boss, Airbuster. Airbuster is the first fight that can be a bit dangerous, though it's still nothing abnormal. Make sure someone has Restore materia, and someone has Bolt 1. Attack when Airbuster isn't facing you to do tons of damage, particularly with limit breaks. He does a lot of damage himself, but just keep everyone topped up and you'll be okay. If you're having trouble, now's the time to start learning how valuable it is to put your allies in the back row. Yes, without a long-range weapon or the long-range materia, you'll do much less attack damage this way. But that issue is massively outweighed by the bonus to defensive capabilities. Survive an attack, and you can take the time to heal, while keeping 3 targets up for your opponent to distract themselves with. If someone goes down though, you have to spend 2 turns reviving them and then healing, and there are 33% fewer targets for your enemy to pick on. That's the easiest and fastest way to get steamrolled, particularly later on when we have to start using an extra mechanic that will require a 3rd turn to ensure a revived character survives. Anyway, Airbuster eventually explodes and Cloud is left hanging there, contemplating his life choices. He falls, and we wake up in Aerith's flower bed. The Turks show up, give chase, and eventually we're left with another choice. Help Aerith or get extra goodies, however paltry, by having her fight for herself. It hurts my soul to ask her to do it alone, but it's for the best. It's not hard, so just smack them all over the head with your stick and move on. Head to Aerith's house, sneak out, get caught, talk about Aerith's love life, and then head to the wall market. If you're smart, instead of being on autopilot like me, you'll intentionally get it wrong so that Don Corneo picks someone other than Cloud as his woman for the night. That will afford you yet again another few extra fights that aren't difficult, but help you out just a bit. Either way, Corneo sends Cloud, Aerith, and the recently found Tifa down to the sewer through a trapdoor. When they wake up, they have to defeat the easier of Corneo's two pets, Apps. Despite being underleveled already, if the player just sticks everyone to the back row and takes their time, it's not a massive danger, especially because Apps will sometimes attack itself for massive damage. Escape the sewers, loot the train graveyard, and then meet back up with the rest of Avalanche. The pillar is about to be blown up by Shinra, so while Aerith evacuates everyone else she can, Tifa and Cloud meet up with Barret. Shortly after, Reno of the Turk shows up for another boss fight. This is another fight that's slightly more difficult than usual, thanks to your low character levels, but it's still pretty standard. Attack, spam any spell you want if you want, heal when necessary, and attack the debilitating pyramids to keep your characters active. If all three of them end up in pyramids, you lose. Targeting the pyramids can be a bit finicky, which is slightly dangerous in active mode, but if you always keep someone at the ready to attack a pyramid, you're good. From here, do not leave yourself with less than 300 gil if you spend any money. Head to Aerith's house, resolve to save her from Shinra, and head back to Wall Market. If you listen to what I said, you can buy the batteries from the dude in the shop nearby. Otherwise, your run is over. Climb up to Shinra HQ. There are two options for heading up through the building. The quiet way up the stairs, which nets you an elixir halfway through, or going through the front and fighting a bunch of Shinra goons. You might think you have to choose, but to that I say, why not both? Go up through the stairs until you grab the elixir, and then head back down through the front. As long as you don't go too far up the stairs, it won't remove the trigger for the loud entrance. Head through the front and fight your way up the elevator. Every forced fight in the elevator can be useful, particularly because we can steal tranquilizers from some of them and carbon bangles from others. The bangles are useful now, and the tranquilizers will be immensely useful later on, so get as many as you can. Once up top, there are a few soldiers with armor on, which also have tranquilizers. Steal them and end them. After that, we reach another room where stealth is recommended, so let's go in loud instead. Contrary to popular belief, these enemies aren't infinite, so we can fight all of them. It'll be more difficult to steal from these guys because they attack from both sides and therefore do a lot of damage. So steal what you can, but only take whatever risks you feel are best for you. The rest of the Shinra headquarters is the same as it always is. If you know what you're doing, there are a ton of goodies to take, including a really nice elemental materia. From here, there are no more fights until the next boss, sample HO512. Once again, this battle feels even tighter than the last few, because our level disparity is getting more and more extreme. It's still not too much harder than normal, but the extra damage can certainly be felt. Don't waste your time curing poison or casting poison, just cast fire and focus on poking the main enemy in the back row. When that's done, get captured, break out, and follow the blood trail. You now have 3 more bosses back to back to back. First are 100 Gunner and Healy Gunner in the elevator. Neither Aerith or Red can target them physically, so preferably equip one of them with Bolt 1, and then give the other character and Barret your restore materia. These fights will take a while, but they're not too much of a threat. With Cloud, meanwhile, both Rufus and his Panther Bro can be poisoned, at which point all you have to do is attack when safe and heal when necessary. Don't worry about the barriers his pet uses, because the poison will be doing the bulk of the damage anyway. You'll get one more chance to equip, heal, and set up your party before you exit Midgar. Pick whoever you think is best, and once again, make sure you have Bolt 1 on. Optionally, you can put it on Barret's weapon with the elemental materia. You'll do a bit less damage, but that means he can also be a healer if needed. Poison isn't useful here, but keep it equipped for the AP as well as any other materia you can fit. Try to minimize the damage everyone takes from the biking minigame, otherwise you'll have to spend an extra turn or more healing at the start. As long as everyone's in the back row, you shouldn't take too much damage during this fight, despite there being a few attacks here that can definitely be dangerous. It all seems pretty simple now, right? The whole of Midgar was mostly the same as usual. But that's not gonna last much longer. With that, we're finally out of Midgar, and free to roam the open world. When you get to Calm, you might think it's necessary to save at least 2,000 gil for the Chocobo lure coming up after the flashback, but since we can't fight random battles, we can't actually use it to capture a Chocobo. So spend what you wish, but still try to keep a bit of extra so that we can save up for the next required expenditure. Once you finish the flashback, you have a choice. Try to defeat the Midgar Zolom, or cheat your way past him. Remember, per the rules, we can't defeat him more than once, and honestly, he's going to be prohibitively difficult right now anyway. He's beatable for sure, but not really worth the headache, so fight him at your own risk. Before you do though, head into the Chocobo Ranch and get the Chocomog summon materia by saying "Wark" to the nearest Chocobo, and watching them dance. This summon really doesn't do much damage, however it has a decent chance of stopping the enemy, which can be useful for getting in several free attacks or some emergency healing. Otherwise, get to the edge of the marsh, save, and then start running across. After a few seconds, save again, quit, and load back in. When you do, the position of the Midgar Zolom will be reset. Repeat this process until you're all the way across, and you never have to fight him a single time. Loot the Mithril Mine for some goodies, including the extra useful long-range materia. Equip this to either Cloud or any other party member that isn't Barret. Which, by the way, if it isn't obvious by now, Barret should be a staple of your party whenever possible, since his natural long-range capabilities will only become more and more useful as we continue. After this, skip Fort Condor because, while it's not useless if you know the trick to basically winning it instantly, it certainly is tedious. You might think it's time to get Yuffie, since this is the first opportunity to do so, and if you're willing to save scum, you certainly can, but I skipped her for an easier grab later. Head to Junon, and prepare for the next boss, Bottom Swell. This is another boss that isn't particularly difficult, but at this point, the damage bosses can start causing is real. We're underleveled enough that they can start two-shotting party members if we're unlucky, and before long, they'll be able to one-shot us, even if we're in the back row. So to combat this, we can start using tranquilizers to inflict ourselves with Sadness. Sadness reduces the rate at which our limit breaks go up by half, but in return, we take 30% less damage. This stacks with the half damage we take while in the back row. One might think to use Fury instead, the opposing status effect to Sadness. This doubles the rate at which you gain your limit, but makes your accuracy drop by 30%. And in a normal playthrough, this is basically the default status you should always have your characters in. And yes, technically, you'd get your limit break practically every time your character is attacked by a boss, or at least every other time. However, again, we're already reaching the point where if we don't have the reduced damage from Sadness and the back row combined, we can be decimated. And remember what I mentioned earlier about how much more detrimental it is when a character goes all the way down? Well, if a character is KO'd, they also lose the Sadness status, unless they're wearing an accessory that prevents it from being inflicted, like a ribbon. So as I mentioned earlier, that means it'll take 3 turns to ensure their survival if they get attacked again. A difficult feat to be sure. You could potentially make up for this when we finally get to Cosmo Canyon. If you don't spend any unnecessary gil and then sell a bunch of stuff, you could probably buy 1 or more HP plus materia that early. And getting them that early would make a pretty big difference in the end. However, your limit charges based on the damage taken versus your maximum HP. So HP plus kind of counters itself, because if you need it to survive with Fury on to build your limit gauge faster, but it makes your limit charge slower, you get the idea. Realistically, we won't be getting anything but our first 2 limits for any characters. You gain new limits from using your last limit a certain amount of times, and from defeating a certain amount of enemies with that character. It shifts back and forth between these 2 criteria. So you could make sure a single character defeats every enemy you fight, to get them a couple of extra limits. Maybe all of their limits except for their final one even. But we're not doing that here because it would be really tedious. Therefore, Sadness, and a more standard strategy it is. The one thing we have to watch out for is gil. Anytime you rest outside of a tent, or at certain story points, the game will remove your sadness status. You don't want to be wasting tranquilizers, because 300 gil to refresh them all each time adds up super fast. We're often going to be lucky if we can even buy more than one armor or weapon at each new shop. Not one for each character, one period. And sadness is much more important than all of that. So anyway, bottom swell. If you want to play it safe and are okay with wasting 3 tranquilizers, set yourself up with sadness. Using Chocomog and cross-slash to stop it temporarily can be fruitful. Also, as will become standard from here forward, use poison to poison it. As long as you play it safe with heals, the only issues you need to worry about are the bubbles it spawns, that are just like Reno's pyramids from earlier, except this time they're destroyed by magic. Make sure every party member has an elemental magic spell and prioritize popping the bubbles. Do this and the fight will go by without a hitch. Give CPR to a little girl while an old man hassles you, ride a dolphin, yes this is a serious game, and then dress up as a Shinra grunt. There aren't any other fights while we're in Junon, but you can get the Force Stealer weapon early and for free if we impress Rufus and Heidegger at the end. Very worth it, since it'll give us a good amount of extra AP for materia of our choosing, for a decent while. From this point forward, I'll only mention important items we can grab as they'll actually become useful in battle. Otherwise, we're going to assume you know where all the goodies are at, and you grab them. If I mention them all and where to get them, this video would be 2 hours longer. So once we're out of Junon, we have a few discussions on a boat before ending up in our first fight with Genova. And interestingly enough, this is the most challenging one. It's not particularly difficult if we stick to using cross-slash and Chocomog for stop, keep sadness and healing up, and poke at her with spells and attacks. She can use stop as well, and her attacks do a fair amount of damage, but this battle is relatively simple if you just keep your head. After this, nothing particularly special happens until we travel through a few areas. Costa del Sol has some materia you might or might not want to pick up. There's an optional fight on the road to Corel, which nets us a bunch of Phoenix down, and then we're free to head up to the Gold Saucer. This is another area where your run will end if you don't have enough money. You need 3,000 gil to get a ticket into the Gold Saucer, so make sure you have saved that much. I didn't, so I had to sell some junk. In here are a few ways to earn money if you're savvy, but I wasn't interested in spending that time, so I head straight for the battle square, where the story progresses and we're thrown down into Corel Prison. At this point, Barrett is a forced party member. Equip him with a minimum of Restore, and then the poison materia, and head through the desert to meet Dine. Dine is a one-on-one fight, which could make it difficult, but similar to the fight against Rufus earlier on, if you just make sure you're safe with your heals, you can either poke away at Dine over time, or use poison and then just hunker down while the problem takes care of itself. Doing this lets us earn our way out by racing chocobos. Grab Rama in the waiting area, win the race, and drive your new buggy down to Gungaga. Here is where our first optional boss comes up. To access Gungaga, we have to beat Rude and Reno in a fight. This time around, they don't have anything particularly valuable to steal, so we can focus on simply winning. Poison is king here. They do a fair amount of damage, but since these fights against the Turks are designed to escalate, they're not much trouble right now. Loot Gungaga and head to the first real destination that will be an actual challenge, Cosmo Canyon. Cosmo Canyon might actually have the most fights out of any area in the game, outside of something like the Temple of the Ancients. After we do all of the story stuff related to the planet dying and such, Bugenhagen takes us down into some caverns through a locked door. In these caverns, there are a wealth of optional fights. Half of them consist of fights with general enemies in this area, like the ghosts of G-soldiers. The other half are with massive spiders that have a dive bomb attack that does enormous damage. The thing is, you have to remember that we're underleveled and don't have much money. And because of that, we don't have a ton of MP for healing between fights, or ethers for filling back up our MP. So if you can, try to do most of your healing with just one character here, so that you can make the most of any ethers you use. The spiders are thankfully susceptible to poison as well, so take advantage of that. If you're lucky, you can actually steal ethers from these enemies, so feel free to try it. Also, make sure to get the added effect materia. This is the only way to get it, and we'll want to basically equip it on a party member's weapon alongside poison for the rest of the game, and leave it there. This will allow us to poison enemies simply by attacking them. When all is said and done, the final thing that remains is the boss, Gina Talk. Gina Talk can actually be defeated instantly by just throwing an X potion at it. However, if you wanted to fight the battle for real, here's how you can do it. Equip someone with the elemental materia on their armor, and combine it with fire. Also, equip someone else with the fire ring you should have picked up in Costa del Sol. Doing this will greatly reduce the damage they take from Gina Talk's fire spirits. You might feel like you're fighting an uphill battle, since these Soulfire enemies can heal themselves, and Gina Talk can do the same. But if you wait long enough, the Soulfires will run out of MP and no longer be able to attack. You can then take it out whenever it's not currently inside one of your party members. Do this, and Gina Talk by itself isn't really threatening. This is a long game fight that's more about survival than offense, but it's more than doable. With that done, we head to Nibelheim and Mount Nibel. Around this time, characters like Cloud, Red, and Barret should usually have just over 1000 HP, even after they have materia equipped that will lower it. Instead, we are approximately as strong as you would be right out of Midgar right now. You can really feel that strain, especially if you take off Sadness and/or hop into the front row. Anyway, here we have yet another optional boss and one of the most challenging fights in the run. Lost Number blocks access to Vincent and the Odin summon materia. We don't care about Vincent because the fact that he can't attack once his limit is up, but you lose control of him when he transforms gives up far too much control. Those issues significantly outweigh the fact that he's a long-range character. Odin, though, can consistently do a lot of damage to bosses, and can even straight up kill normal enemies instantly. Not to mention the extra Gil AP and experience this boss offers. Lost Number does a lot of damage in general, but also has a gimmick to it. Once it drops below half health, Lost Number will transform based on whether the last attack done to it was physical or magic. If it was magic, it gains tons of magic and magic defense, but has lower standard defense. If it was physical, it will gain a huge boost to attack damage and standard defense, but takes more magic damage. In my experience, the latter is more dangerous, particularly the way we're doing this battle, emphasizing poison damage while healing. We don't want to waste tons of MP on having to take him down with excess spells, so try to make sure he turns into his magic form, and then turtle up and try to survive. Survival is the hardest part here, but you can achieve it despite our lower level. Optionally, you can simply poison him, and then not attack from there. Ticks of poison won't cause him to transform, so if you don't attack in any other way after he's poisoned, he won't transform, but this will take longer. When that's done, grab whatever you need and head to Mount Nibel. There are plenty of goodies here, and there's a single boss, Materia Keeper. When I was first playing through Final Fantasy VII, Materia Keeper had me stuck for months and months. Why? Well, because I was so bad at the game that I ran from nearly every random battle, so I was in a similar situation to what I am now, but with a severe lack of understanding of the materia system and my other battle options, let alone JRPGs in general. Poison will once again be our go-to. Materia Keeper hits about as hard as Lost Number, but isn't quite as aggressive. Make sure someone has enemy skill on, and that same person has the lightning materia paired with elemental on their armor. Then emphasize keeping them at high health. That way, when Materia Keeper does Trine, they can survive and learn the attack. This will have a few major uses later on. Materia Keeper will also heal itself every once in a while, but with poison on, that won't help it much. This is another battle where the goal is survival, not necessarily being proactive. Take him down, grab and equip the incredibly useful counter materia, preferably to the party member who has long range materia and poison combined with added effect as well, and then leave Mount Nibel. Once on the other side, find the nearest forest. At this point in the game, you have an extremely high chance of encountering Yuffie when you enter a battle in a forest. So if we get into a battle with her first try, I personally don't consider it a random battle, since the fight is optional, but scripted to happen specifically under these circumstances, and there are no other enemies to defeat with her. She's an easy fight, and if you've played before, easy to party up with. We don't necessarily care about Yuffie here, although she's definitely not a bad party member. Instead, we care about the optional content she'll give us access to shortly. After she's on our side, head to Rocket Town. Our only fight here is with Palmer, who's a joke. Poison him and move on. Now we can finally cross shallow waters. Instead of continuing with the story though by heading to the Gold Saucer, let's take a side trip to Wutai, and what ends up being the most lucrative but arguably most difficult section of the entire run. When you approach Wutai, Yuffie will run off with all of your materia. At this point, you're stuck. If you save and then you find you can't do this section, you're in big trouble. Under normal circumstances, you can actually have so many materia that Yuffie will leave you with some, but that's definitely not going to be the case here, and generally isn't the case this early on. And while we only have one noteworthy fight while we're stuck here, it's an absolutely brutal one. Along the way, there are a handful of fights with Shinra punks, but these are designed to be easy. They're long-winded, but just mash attack, and even as weak as we are, you'll be fine. Play hide-and-seek with Yuffie, get tricked by her again, and then chase down the mysterious figure that captured both her and Elena from the Turks, Don Corneo. When you finally find him, he'll have another pet to fight, this time known as Raps. How creative. Raps does extremely high damage attacks. It's unlikely that every party member will survive this fight, and if you revive them, they're even less likely to stay alive, since they'll have obviously lost their sadness status, so he'll be able to take them out even faster. If you haven't already figured it out, Red's Lunatic High is a decently useful limit to use early on in a fight, since it offers haste to everyone, and then raises Red's defense percentage by 50%, so he's more likely to evade. Use that, and then really emphasize surviving. You might need to invest in some high potions, and don't be afraid to throw out an elixir or two if absolutely necessary. You can throw any throwables that cast spells if you want, which can be bought at the shop in Wutai as well, but you really should focus mostly on keeping everyone at max health, and using limit breaks to deal damage. Raps only has 6000 HP, but it's still a massive threat. Doubly so since we don't have the long-range materia right now, so only Barret can do normal attack damage. It's probably smart to have star pendants on to avoid his poison. You'd think you might be able to poison him too, but there's not really any way to do so without random battles. You can't steal from, morph, or get a drop from enemies you can't fight after all. So basically, this battle relies on a lot of luck to win, but can be won. With Raps defeated, you'll end up 20,000 gil richer, and you'll get to do the second half of the Wutai side quest. Despite having to do every pagoda fight with only Yuffie, they're all fairly straightforward. The core is still to poison, and then focus on survival. Some of them will give you some good items, particularly notable is the Ice Ring. Some of them will cast statuses, including removing sadness and replacing it with fury. Some of them will heal themselves, and some of them have severe weaknesses, like low MP, meaning they'll run out of options pretty quickly. All of them, though, give Yuffie a large amount of experience, which means everyone else gets a decent chunk of experience as well. Since we have a fair amount of gil now, it's worth it to stock up on tranquilizers a bit more. Rest in between each fight because resting in Wutai is free, and then reapply sadness to Yuffie each time. And trust me, you're okay to do so, because beating Goto's transformation at the end will give you an extra 40,000 gil. While you don't necessarily want to go ham with your spending now, you can be a bit less frugal. Still, watch out for buying equipment since prices will skyrocket relatively quickly, which means I wouldn't recommend buying the lifetime pass at the Gold Saucer just yet, if at all. Speaking of, now that Wutai is done, that advice will be tested. Head to Gold Saucer to get the Keystone, have it immediately stolen, and then follow the Turks to the Temple of the Ancients. You're forced to use Eris here, but her low health is countered by the fact that her limit break comes up regularly. There are a few fights here and many great items. Explore thoroughly, particularly at the clock. You'll run across some annoying frogs with an ice lady, some absolutely brutal 8 eyes, and a pincer attack fight with some dragonfly type enemies. While the fight with the frogs and the lady is pretty easy but annoying, the other two are literal nightmares. No joke, these might actually be the 2 hardest fights in the run on a technical level. They are hugely luck-based, purely because of how much damage these enemies consistently deal. However, unlike bosses like Raps or Lost Number, there's a solution. These are normal enemies, meaning you can just summon Odin to immediately kill all of them, guaranteed. One more important note is to grab the ribbon while you're here. It's probably the most valuable treasure in this area, both because it prevents every status effect you don't want, and because it will allow you to retain sadness if you go down and are revived. After this, we have two bosses back to back, Red Dragon and the dreaded Wall Boss, officially known as Demon's Gate. You can reduce the damage Red Dragon does with things like Elemental and Fire or Ifrit materia combinations, as well as the Fire Ring. Chocomog and Cross Slash's Stop both do particularly well here offensively, and Poison with added effect will once again end him quickly. You can push even harder by using summons like Odin or Leviathan, which you should have gotten in Wutai. This is just the teaser fight, so it should be no trouble. Demon's Gate, however, is far tougher. It does a handful of area of effect attacks, and its single target attacks usually deal a lot of damage. If you haven't realized it by now while watching, it's worth noting that area of effect attacks can be a problem if they do any substantial amount of damage. The reason is because our all materia level's slower than normal in a run like this, and that leaves us unable to use multi-target cures more than once or twice per person for most of the game. Combine that with the fact that you only get one restore materia naturally and have to buy a second and third, and that these materia also level slower, meaning you'll spend a lot more of the game with subpar healing spells, and you have to be much more tactical with your heals than normal here. Demon's Gate is arguably the first boss that really exemplifies this issue. When possible, use Healing Wind and single target cure spells first, and try to save your multi-target spells for when you really need them. Demon's Gate also has ridiculously high magic defense, so summons won't really do much damage. We have to focus on limits, attacking to whittle him down, and general survival. It's a longer fight because of this, but as long as you're smart with your heals, it's doable. It might be worth trying to use the Death Blow materia to get extra critical hits on your basic attacks, and early on, Demi can do a large amount of damage to get a good head start. With counterattack on your side though, you'll be able to overcome this challenge either way. More story happens after this, and eventually you'll be tasked with going through Bone Village to get to the Forgotten City, where the end of the first disc awaits. From here on forward, you no longer have access to Eris. Grab the Kujata materia in the forest area, and also the all-important Water Ring. With this, the last remaining boss of this disc literally cannot defeat you. And that last boss is Jenova again. Equip someone with the Water Ring and every attack will heal that character, since every attack Jenova has here is a water-based attack. This includes the enemy skill Aqualung, which similar to Trine can be useful later on, so obviously obtain it. If you want to keep your other characters alive to help, you'll have to play it extra liberal with your heals. Eventually though, things get even worse for Jenova, as she'll run out of MP and be unable to take any actions at all. At this point, you can freely revive anyone who is out of commission at the moment, and then poke at her until she's defeated. It's around this time where you should finally start getting Cure 2 as an option, which not only means you'll have much more powerful heals, but that you'll have twice as many opportunities to use multi-target heals. From here, we continue on toward the North Crater. Once you're done counting all of your experience from that last fight, head to Icicle Inn. Loot it, buy whatever you feel you need, dodge Elena's punch, and then go snowboarding. Yes, this is a serious game. It doesn't really matter where you land, and it's up to you if you want to do everything available here. Without random encounters, it'll probably take like 10 minutes, but if you don't have it memorized, it'll still be confusing. There's one optional fight here, if you touch the hot springs and then talk to a lady in a cave. Snow, as she's called, is not challenging in the slightest, and will also run out of MP after a while if you're trying to steal from her, meaning she can't do anything. And as with a lot of these later fights, you'll definitely want to steal from her. There are a lot of great steal items going forward. In this case, Snow has a circlet, which can prove very useful for boosting certain stats. For beating her, you get the summon Alexander. Once all of that is done, head up the cliff. There are a few fights with bats and icicles here. They're not challenging fights, but they're annoying because the bats get so many turns. You can definitely use summons and such to take care of them, or you can just poke at them with fast forward on. Just try to make sure that the person who has the ribbon on also has restore materia, so that you always have the ability to heal. The bats can silence you, which could spell trouble if you don't take it seriously. After this is a boss that a lot of people seem to find challenging, though I think it's more because they don't properly equip themselves and because they don't keep in mind that it does a last resort attack after you defeat each head. This boss can do a lot of damage for sure, but outside of its earthquake attack, they're all either fire damage, ice damage, or both. So equip fire rings, aurora armlets, ice rings, etc. The good thing is, even if an attack does both types of damage, it defaults to whatever one you're resistant to or absorb, so not everyone has to be protected against everything. When the heads get close to defeat, try not to do area of effect attacks. That way you don't risk accidentally defeating both at once and getting hit with 2 earthquakes back to back. Also, make sure your characters are topped up in terms of health before a head goes down, obviously. I would recommend stealing the protect ring from this boss while you can as well. It's not super useful, but there is one part where it will prove valuable. Keep going from here and eventually you'll make it to the actual crater. Tifa will want to join your party if you're not using her already. If you skip the whirlwind maze walls that can force you into battles like I did, there's only one fight down here, our penultimate battle with Jenova. This time it's literally the opposite of our last fight with her. All she uses are fire-based attacks and silence. Equip characters with fire resistance or absorption and they cannot be defeated. Steal the reflect ring if you think you have a use for it, maybe selling it, or just can't handle not successfully stealing from bosses, and then move on. A bunch of story shenanigans happen, and when we finally gain control again, we're playing as Tifa. Then we switch to Barret. There's some basic battling against Shinra soldiers alongside Kate Sith, but that's about it. Eventually you'll have access to the airship. At any time going forward, you can head to Cosmo Canyon to grab some HP plus materia. 1 for each character will suffice. I end up doing this a bit later. Otherwise, when you're ready, fly to Midgar. You'll find Cloud there, and the party leader will once again switch from Tifa to Cid. As Cid, head through the back entrance to Corel as you did all those hours ago. Jump on your little baby train and use it to catch up to Shinra's bigger train. There's a fight on every train car here. If you haven't been using Cid, this is where you'll want to use the Protect Ring, since these battles don't last super long, so it should be useful the whole time. The fights that we care about are with the Wolfmeister and the Eagle Gun. Neither is particularly strong, but we're on a time limit. Thankfully, the Wolfmeister has no steals. Eagle Gun, however, has a Warrior Bangle, which has some really solid magic protection, so take it if you want it. Other than that, here's where Aqualung and Trine start to come in handy. Wolfmeister is weak to water, so Aqualung will do a bunch of damage, particularly if you equip the circlet from earlier, and Eagle Gun is weak to Trine, which will have a similarly powerful effect. Keep yourself healed, and these will be cake. After one more fight with Shinra, you can stop the train. In doing so, you then gain the Ultima Materia to use if you want. Now finally head to Fort Condor. Start the minigame and then intentionally lose it. This will force you into a fight with Commander Grandhorn. This boss is weak, but nets you an Imperial Guard armlet for a win and nearly 10,000 gil. Head back to Midgar now. If you haven't already and you want it, grab the curse ring by finding the hidden key and trying it on the fake door. Then prepare for a fight with Ultima Weapon, where if you're quick, you can steal an extra curse ring. This battle is more about survival because Ultima will fly off after a set amount of turns. You get no rewards, so don't worry about keeping every character alive, just don't get a game over. After this is a long story section with no battles, and then we finally gain control of Cloud again. Make your way to Upper Junon and then to the underwater reactor. There are a few small fights along the way that don't really offer a challenge. At the end though, we reach the boss, one of the toughest bosses in the game, regardless of whether you're doing a run like this or not, Carry Armor. Carry Armor really has 3 challenging aspects to him. Firstly, he has a lot of health, and 3 targets to take care of, a body and 2 arms. Secondly, these arms can grab characters and hold onto them. When he has a character in his grasp, he'll damage them every time you damage him. He'll only let go when the arm is destroyed or the character he's holding is dead. And with both arms, he can grab 2 of your 3 party members, making survival incredibly difficult. However, if you destroy both arms, you'll run into a third problem: Lapis Laser. This is an attack that hits your whole party and does an immense amount of damage. He'll do this attack on occasion no matter what, but if he has no arms, that's all he can do. One might think this means your best option is to just destroy one arm and to avoid using powerful area of effect options that could help out, like summons or trine. But in fact, if you prepare your assault correctly and always leave a character ready to heal, it's better to destroy both arms. This is largely because as long as you keep up your barrage, you can actually get in a ton more attacks than normal in between each Lapis Laser if he has no arms. Especially if you use Lunatic High, you can keep the heat up pretty effectively, and Trine will do loads of damage. This fight is likely to be pretty tight regardless, but this is the best way I've found to manage it. With this done, grab all the treasure, do a few more fights with Shinra soldiers, and then decimate the enemy sub. From here, I immediately grabbed the huge materia from the sunken sub, grabbed the key to the Ancients so I didn't have to later, and then made my way to the sunken Gelnika airship. There are several goodies here, including the Heaven's Cloud Sword, the marvelous double cut materia that allows attack to hit twice in one turn, and if you're using Yuffie, her ultimate weapon, Conformer. You can also grab the Hades summon, which is fantastic for either attaching to added effect on your weapon or armor, or just using in battle for a wealth of status effects. To get some of this stuff though, you'll need to go through the Turks. Funnily enough, the game assumes you'll do this later, and so the dialogue suggests this is the last time you'll meet. Thankfully, it's only Rude and Reno. They're tougher than all of the previous encounters, with confusion being a particular nuisance, but they also have some incredible goodies, including the Tough Ring, which raises vitality and spirit by 50 points each, and the Zedrich, which doesn't have any materia slots but raises strength and magic by 20 points, and halves basically every type of damage, on top of having insane equip stats to begin with. This encounter is pretty standard overall, with the difficult part being surviving enough to steal both items, and avoiding confusion. Be careful not to poison them early if you want to steal, but otherwise, strategy here is pretty freeform. For me, using summons and Trine worked particularly well, as did having double cut and added effect with poison on Cloud. Now head back to Rocket Town. There are a few fights with Shinra grunts, and then in an absolutely hilarious turn of events, another fight with a much weaker Rude. You're forced to use Sid and Cloud here, so I'd advise keeping Barret and losing your normal third. Although, Rude is so weak here that it's hardly worth worrying about. Once again, you can steal another Zedrich, so if you want it, definitely do so. Otherwise, pound him and his buddies into the ground. Eventually, you'll make it into the rocket, launch into space, and then if you're smart, grab the final huge materia. Take all of them to Cosmo Canyon, and then examine the blue one to get Bahamut Zero, the most powerful summon we'll be obtaining. With the key to the Ancients in hand, head back to the Forgotten City, do the story stuff, and then you'll be tasked with fighting Diamond Weapon. This battle isn't particularly difficult, but it is frustrating since Diamond is usually immune to physical attacks. Again, there's not any particular strategy here other than using attacks that will hit, like summons or magic, and doing as much damage as you can when his chest is open. Diamond is dangerous, particularly if you want the Rising Sun weapon for Yuffie, but otherwise, it's nothing remarkable. From this fight forward, we'll get tons of experience, AP, and gil for beating most bosses. While there is at least one difficult fight after this is where the game starts to level itself back out and reveal just how little growth you see from fighting random encounters. As such, from here forward, you'll also want to try and make sure you have any materia you want to level up equipped, even if you don't plan on using it in that specific battle. Parachute into Midgar and start looting these new areas until you get to a save point. From here, we have one of the only remaining tough fights, once again with the Turks. Although this time they brought Elena with them. The sheer amount of turns they can get here will probably prove a challenge, particularly on active mode, and Elena can use confusion. To add to this, you can once again steal another Zedrich, a Tough Ring, and a Minerva Band from Elena if you need it for any female party member. Surviving while stealing here can be a real pain. Don't be afraid to pop something like a Mega Elixir if you feel you need it, just don't abuse them. Once you have the steals you want, use things like Hades and Bahamut Zero, as well as whatever the rest of your strongest options are. Once again, Trine and Aqualung can prove useful. With that over, grab W item and head to the Shinra HQ to grab Kate Sith's ultimate weapon if you want it. While you certainly can break the game with W item here if you want to, I'm choosing not to, so as to try and make it as fair and interesting as possible. I don't mind using glitches in runs like this, but W item makes it more or less impossible to lose, which ruins the fun of this challenge for me. Once you're done with that, you can head forward and fight the Proud Claude. This fight is an absolute joke. I guess it's fitting for Scarlet and Heidegger. There's hardly any strategy here and nothing to steal, so just decimate it and be done with it. If you want Barrett's ultimate weapon, grab it here with him in your party. Although since its damage is based on the total amount of AP his equipped materia has accrued, it's not recommended in a challenge like this. He'll likely do paltry damage, far less than with other weapons. Also, make sure to grab the Mistile before you leave. This armlet is generally a bit better balanced than the Zeidrich, though it is weaker. It has plenty of materia slots and respectable stats. What makes it valuable though is that it has a 50% chance of outright evading physical attacks and a 60% chance of evading magical ones. And taking no damage is always preferable to taking reduced damage. I put my first one on red because combined with Lunatic High, he basically never gets hit by physical attacks. To end our visit to Midgar, we have a fight with Hojo. He has 3 forms and once again, nothing to steal. This means you can put your all into each fight. The first fight is really nothing to speak on. It's not dangerous at all. The second fight also isn't dangerous, though he can confuse your party members if you're not careful. The third fight can see Hojo silencing characters, but while he can do okay damage, with Sadness and the back row on our side, it's simply not enough. Hit him with whatever your strongest options are, and then use things like double cut to finish him off quickly. From here, we only have the end of the game to do, as far as actual story content goes. However, we can do some optional things to further bolster ourselves. Some of these include things like grabbing Red's ultimate weapon, and full cure from Cosmo Canyon, using a landing glitch with the High Wind in order to grab Quadra Magic, heading into the Ancient Forest for Slash All, and in order to get into the Ancient Forest, defeating Ultima Weapon. Since most of this isn't battle related, I'll focus specifically on Ultima. To defeat Ultima, you have to find it on the world map, wait until it stops at a location, and then fight it. You'll want to do as much damage as you can because after it reaches a certain threshold, it'll head to the Ancient Forest for the final battle. Whenever it's on the ground in a battle, you can steal a Reflect Ring, and whenever it's in the air, you can steal a Circlet. Otherwise, battles are pretty straightforward. Throw your strongest options at him until he flies away, immediately try to find him, follow him until he stops, and then use a tent to heal and do it again. Generally, Ultima won't do too much damage to you. It's only when he tries to use Shadow Flare that you really have to watch out, but if you're lucky, he'll do it to the party member with the Mistile on and it'll miss. When Ultima finally goes down, you'll gain a wealth of experience, AP, and gil, as well as Cloud's ultimate weapon, aptly titled Ultima Weapon. This weapon does damage based on Cloud's max health in relation to his current health. It allows him to become very powerful immediately, particularly if you've been leveling HP plus materia, and by now you should have the rest of your materia leveled high enough to be able to afford the fact that ultimate weapons don't offer materia growth. So stick all of the materia you don't need to level on his weapon, Red's weapon, or whatever other ultimate weapons you want to grab and use along the way. Once all that is done, all that's left is Sephiroth and Jenova. North Crater is pretty chill if you aren't facing random battles. There's a fair amount of good loot here, and if you use a certain exploit similar to running up the stairs at Shinra HQ and then going in the normal entrance, you can end up with things like 2 Mega All Materials, 2 extra Mistile Armlets, and more. When you've fully looted everything, head to the final set of battles. Now, one might think this is going to be a real challenge, but you'd be wrong. Even without the ultimate weapons and Quadra Magic and the exploits for extra missiles and such, we're so well equipped that only the final battle with Sephiroth even stands the slightest of chances. This game is just kinda that easy. There are a few fights with powerful mobs leading up to the final gauntlet, but these are cake. Just mash attack and move on. Eventually, you'll find yourself facing Jenova. With Double Cut and 2 other characters having Slash All thanks to the Mega All materia and the actual Slash All we have, she'll go down before she can even understand what's happening. Then comes Bizarro Sephiroth. Once again, not a challenging fight in the slightest, though make sure you equip someone with the Destruct materia before you go into this one. As soon as the real battle with Safer Sephiroth begins, and he puts up a protective barrier, use D-Barrier to deal with it. Then use the W item option and an extra turn to throw the 3 hero drinks you should have by now on your most powerful character, most likely Cloud, thanks to the ultimate weapon. If you don't care about everyone surviving, because there's no real boss after this, then you can also stack Cloud with all 3 HP plus materias to further raise his strength and survivability. Combine that with the counterattack and long range, and he becomes an absolute monster. Safer Sephiroth can do a lot of damage for sure, but if you keep everyone other than Cloud focused on healing, and if you have mistyles on, you're pretty safe. Once this is finished, you have a story fight with shirtless Sephiroth, which you can't actually lose. Fall asleep at the controller or Omni Slash him back to hell, your choice. After that's done, you're done. Outside of mods, this to me is the most rewarding way to play through Final Fantasy VII if you're looking for a challenge. As you can probably tell, it's not extremely hard, but it's certainly tougher than the game could ever be normally. And there are ways to make it even more difficult, like by skipping a lot of the optional stuff we did. Though it's worth noting that this can also make things much tougher, not only due to the experience and AP it deprives you of, but also the Gil equipment and materia. Again, it kind of stacks on itself. This is probably the challenge I've done for this channel that I recommend the most so far. It's by far the least difficult when compared to beating Kingdom Hearts 2 without Keyblade combos or Birth by Sleep without battle commands, but that also makes it the most widely accessible. And the great thing is, it doesn't feel like giant parts of the game are just missing. Instead, it just feels like resources are a lot tighter and enemies put up more of a threat. If you want to check out those other challenges, I definitely recommend doing so. And if you're interested in more Final Fantasy content, I have critiques of Final Fantasy VII, Part 1 of the remake, a massive critique on Final Fantasy XIII that took me 10 years to put together, and older videos on 15 from when it released, the original PS2 version of 12, and Final Fantasy IX. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.